are coming very close to the end. It's very exciting. We're holding Daf Chavav Amud Aleph. We are at the second Mishnah on the page. It's not very often that you find three Mishnahs on the same page in the Gemara, but in this case, we have three Mishnahs on one page. Look at that.
Yeah, it's short ones.
Yeah, short ones. So we are holding by the second Mishnah, and we've just finished talking about how we trust the Am Haaretz, even with regards to Truma during the Regel, during Yom Tov. Okay, and why? Well, because in a very tragic situation where the story of the Pelegesh Begiva, right, the concubine in Giva, where they violated
Binyamin.
That's right. So it says over there, with regards to the Jewish people gathering together, it says they all gathered together, echad chaverim, right? And so from there, we learn that when Jews gather together, they are considered chaverim, and the time of the Shalosh Regalim is a time of the gathering of all the Jewish people together, and therefore we consider them chaverim. Okay, so now the Mishnah that we're about to start is going to talk about what happens if a person started to prepare food or wine, right? And he starts to sell it, and he's got no problem with regards to Tum and Tahara, because we say that everybody's like a chaver during the festival. But what happens if he's left over with a lot of dough or a lot of wine? Is he still able to continue selling it as something that is pure? Or do we say that, no, that was only a dispensation for Yom Tov. After Yom Tov, you got to chuck the rest out. Okay, so let's do it inside. Sorry. Says the Hilchah Mishnah, if somebody opens up his barrel, this is a barrel of wine, or somebody begins selling his batch of dough, al gav haregel, on Yom Tov, and he doesn't manage to sell all of it, so you have left over. The question is, what do we do with the leftovers? Can I come along and can I sell it to another chaver who is careful with Tumah Tahara or not? In other words, is it Tameh? What's the story? Rabbi Yehuda says, Yigmar, you can finish selling it after Yom Tov. Okay? You can finish selling it after Yom Tov. And the Chachamim say, Lo Yigmar, you cannot continue selling it after Yom Tov. Why? Because now it is going to be considered retroactively now, Tameh, because it came into contact with the Amaretz. All the Amaratzim that came in over Yom Tov, they certainly came into contact as they were buying it. For Yom Tov, we said we're considering them to be okay, but after Yom Tov, everything reverts back, and so therefore this dough or this wine is no longer tar, and therefore you cannot continue selling it. Okay? Now, what's the reason? What's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda would allow him to continue selling it? So the reason Rashi brings, right? 1 second. It's going to come up in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to discuss it. So let's continue with the Gemara. So says the Gemara, Yosef, Rav Ami, Rabbi Yitzchok, Nafcha. You had Rav Ami and Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha. Ikloi, the Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha. They were sitting on the porch of Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha. So one of them started a conversation, and he said, Mahu, what would be the din? That maybe you could leave this wine over or this dough over for the next Yom Tov. Right? Remember, we had this idea previously that if somebody comes along and he brings his truma barrel of wine outside of just after the pressing season, we say take it back home and bring it for the next season. So we're asking the same idea. We're trusting the Amaretz for Yom Tov, right? So therefore, after Yom Tov, what should I do with the leftovers? Put it aside. And maybe you can leave it for the next Yom Tov and then it'll be okay. That's what one of them posed to the other. Amalei, so the other guy turned back around to him and said, what are you talking about? Yad hakel mashmir shimbo, but amrit yenichena regel ache. Everybody's hand is touching it, meaning all the amaratim, they're touching it, and you're going to say leave it over for the next Yom Tov? It's become tamei, and since it's become tamei, it can't be sold. Amalei, so the first guy turns back to him and he says, one second. Until now, you didn't have everybody touching it. Everybody's been touching it till now, and you still said it was okay for Yom Tov. So since you said it's okay, so maybe I can keep it for the other Yom Tov. Amalei, so the other guy said back to him, Haki Hashta, can you really compare? It's all fine and good until this point, meaning till the end of Yom Tov, that you can sell it because Tumas Ama Ores Beregel Rachmanatara, because the Torah came along and told us that the Tumah of the Ama Ores is considered to be Tahar. It's considered to be Tahar for Yom Tov. Meaning, although the Ama Ores do touch and they are Matama food, but nevertheless, we disregard this Tumah for Yom Tov because of the Pasuk.
Rabbi,
yeah.
How could he say God is allowing it? Because it's not, and God is not allowing it. This is a rabbinical determination.
So what we're saying is that since the Torah came along and called everybody Chaverim, so therefore during the time of Yom Tov, the rabbis suspend this what do you call it? This de facto position of the hands of the Amaratim being Tomei, and they say that we don't consider that during Yom Tov. We don't consider that during Yom Tov. They probably are Tomei. We don't consider it because the pasuk has called everybody a chaver during the Yom Tov season because they're all gathered together. And this is only rabbinic. Again, if you have an Am Ha'aretz or you have a chaver who knows that they've come into contact with Tumah, then there's nothing to talk about. They know that they've come into contact with Tumah. That's biblical, and there's nothing to talk about. Here we're talking about the rabbinic Tumah that we place them into a category because we assume certain things about them, not that we know for sure. So we're saying that when an Am Ha'aretz touches something on Yom Tov, we say, even though ordinarily we suspect them that they're Tamei, and therefore what they touched is Tamei, all of that is put aside for Yom Tov. But after Yom Tov, what we're going to come along and say is that now everything retroactively becomes Tamei. As we're going to see later on, another Mishnah which talks about purifying the whole Azara because of the Amaratim who came into contact with it, right? So now, so therefore, when you're coming along and you're suggesting that 1 second, you want to come along and say that you want to keep it for the next Yom Tov, you can't keep it for the next Yom Tov. Why can't you keep it for the next Yom Tov? Because all the Amaratim have touched it. You come along and say, but what do you mean? They touched it during Yom Tov. Yes, we can't compare because during Yom Tov, the Chachamim suspended all of that only because the Torah came along and said that despite all of your concerns, that we're calling them Chaverim, and so therefore we're making everything Tahar, meaning we disregard the Tumah, Elahashta Tameahi. However, now that the Yom Tov has passed, now that the food is Tamei retroactively, from when? From the moment that the Amaretz touched it. And therefore, this idea of keeping it for the next Yom Tov doesn't work. It doesn't work to keep it for the next Yom Tov, right? Okay, so now, when we mentioned this Mishnah, what did we say in the Mishnah? We said that you have a guy who opened his barrel and a guy who starts making this dough, and he started to sell it on Yom Tov, and then the Yom Tov passed it. According to the Chachamim, according to the Rabbanan, lo yikmar, you cannot finish it. You cannot finish selling it after Yom Tov. Okay? Now, the question whether or not you could keep it for the next Yom Tov or not, right? We have what seems to be a bit of a back and forth between Rav Ami and Rabbi Yitzchok, where one of them seems to be advocating that you should be able to keep it for the next Yom Tov, and the other one seems to vehemently oppose it and say, no, it doesn't make sense, and you can't. So now we want to maybe suggest that maybe this discussion between Rabbi Yitzchok and Rabbi Ami is actually a machlekes among the Tanaim within the view of the Chachamim. Because remember, we have two opinions in the Mishnah. One opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says you can continue selling it, and one opinion of the Rabbanan, who say you cannot continue selling it. This whole discussion is only following the view of the one who says you cannot sell it, meaning the Chachamim. Because obviously, if you can continue selling it, you don't have to have a whole discussion about whether you can keep it for next Yom Tov or not, because it's irrelevant, right? Here, the question only is whether you can sell it, whether you can put it away after Yom Tov. Let's say that this discussion, this disagreement between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchok is actually a machlekes of the Tanoim. There's one brisa that says, food that's left over from the Yom Tov, you can put it aside for the next Yom Tov, and then you can sell it. And then yet there's another brisa that says, he does not set it aside for the next festival. So my love, Tanohi. So why can't we say then that this discussion between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchok is a machlekes between the Tanaim within the view of the Chachamim? Okay, that say that you cannot continue to sell it after the Yom Tov. The only question is whether you can put it away for next Yom Tov or not. And for the Gemara, no, you cannot say that it's a machlekes Tanaim. Why? Because when you bring these two brises, who says these two brises are both in accordance with the Rabbanan? Perhaps it's in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. The brisa that came along and said that you should set it aside, it's Rabbi Yehuda, right? The one who says set it aside is Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says that the food is okay. Right? So therefore you can set it aside for next Yom Tov as well, because it hasn't become tummy. But the one who says in the second brisa that he cannot set it aside, that reflects the views of the Chachamim. So therefore, this is not a machlekes Tanoim within the view of the Rabbanan. These two brises reflect the different opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. So therefore, when Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchok were having this discussion, it wasn't a reflection of a machlekes Tanoim, but rather they were discussing it within the view of the Chachamim. Right? The Gemara of Tizbra. Does that really make sense? Does it really make sense that to say that the brisa, right? That the brisa that says that you can put it aside for next Yom Tov is a reflection of Rabbi Yehuda's view that says that you could continue selling it after Yom Tov? Rabbi Yehuda says that you can finish selling it after Yom Tov. So therefore, how would it make sense that Rabbi Yehuda in another brisa would come along and say what? Would say, put it away for next Yom Tov. He doesn't believe you have to put it away for next Yom Tov. He believes that you can continue selling it after Yom Tov. So Ella, rather, what do you have to say? You have to interpret the brisas differently. What are you going to say? The one who says that you don't put it away, you don't set it aside, that actually is Rabbi Yehuda. And the brisa that says, and the one who says you do put it away for the next Yom Tov, that's the view of the Rabbanan. What does it really mean in the brisa that reflects Rabbi Yehuda's position, which says that you should not put it to the side? It's not that you're not allowed to put it aside, but rather you're not required to set it aside, but rather you can sell it immediately. But why? Why can we sell it immediately? So Rashi explains this, and basically the idea is like this: there are certain things the Chachamim allowed you to start, even though it's not going to be possible to finish. What does that mean? That means like this: if I come along and I say, I'm going to come along and make a big barrel of wine, I'm only going to sell a third of it, right? Or I'm only going to sell a half of it. And then you're going to come along and then you're going to make all of my wine no good after Yom Tov. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to bother making the wine. Why should I put myself out and make a loss? I just won't do it altogether. But if that's going to be the case, then there'll be no wine and there'll be no challah, there'll be nothing, there'll be no bread or wine, whatever it is that's needed for Yom Tov in Yerushalayim. Why? Because nobody's going to want to take it upon themselves to make such a major loss. So therefore, the Chachamim said that even though ideally you should just start, and we're allowing you to start, but you shouldn't finish, nevertheless, we're going to allow you to finish, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to allow you to finish selling it so that there should be food for Yom Tov for everybody in Yerushalayim, right? Hey, if you look at this Hachi Garsinan in Rashi, it's a long Hachi Garsinan. This is the Girsa. It says, "My love to Noihi." Hod Tani Yanichena Rabbi Yehuda v'Hod the Tani Le Yanichena Rabbanan. So the Gemara asks for Tisbur of Rabbi Yehuda Yigmar Kama Elahod the Tani Yanichena Rabbanan v'Hod the Tani Le Yanichena Rabbi Yehuda. Omay Yanichena Omay Le Yanichena Chulu. So here, so that was the Dibra Maskal, the title of the Rashi. But Rashi, look at the Rashi itself. It's the Rashi right before the Mishnah. It says like this: My love Tanoihi. Why can't we say that it is a machlekas of the Tanoim, Va'aliba the Rabbanon, and in accordance with the view of the Rabbanon, the Tifshet, and we will explain it that Boyd. Boy, the Leil, the Plukta the Tanohi. 1 second, that's not what I was talking about. It was the Rashi before. Excuse me, not this Rashi. It was the Rashi before that I was referring to. Sorry. Tameahi. 1 second. The last line of the second last line of the Rashi, V'oid, and furthermore, basically, Rashi wants to quote from some who have a different opinion of how to understand this, right? Okay, let me just explain what's going on in Rashi. What Rashi is saying like this: there's two ways to understand our Mishnah. One way to understand our Mishnah is that the guy who's baking the bread and the guy who's making the wine is a chaver, and we're making these instructions for the chaver. Can he sell it? Can he not sell it? Right? But there are others who want to understand the Mishnah differently, and they want to come along and they want to say that the instructions in this Mishnah is not for the chaver; it's for the Amaretz. That's who we're giving these instructions to. And the question is whether we allow this Am Ha'aretz to continue selling it or not. So here, let's do it inside. Let's do this Rashi inside. Tameahi lemafreya. We're saying that the dough and everything becomes tamei from retroactively. V'chaver ein Rashi limkor davar shuhu tamei la'olam. And a chaver is not allowed to sell anything tamei. That's just the halacha for a chaver. Anybody who comes to buy from the chaver assumes that what he's selling is tahar, and he's not allowed to sell tamei because it might be an issue of lifnei even l'sita michshol. Could be you're causing a stumbling block. So says Rashi, v'yesh mefarshim isa, and some people want to interpret this Mishnah ba'amaretz, that is talking about instructions to an amaretz. V'i efshar leima ba'amaretz lo yigmar. Right? Rashi says, I can't accept that explanation. You can't say that we're going to tell the Amaretz not to continue selling. Why? To be Tzayitzlon? Is he going to listen to us? Isn't he going to say, like we said previously, if we tell him that his stuff is all Tameh, that Shelchat Tameh v'Shelitar, that yours is Tameh and mine is Tar. So he's going to come along and he's going to turn around and he's not going to listen to us. So clearly, according to Rashi, he's saying we cannot interpret this Mishnah as being instructions to the Amaretz. What's going to happen with the Amoritz is he'll find his own friends who will buy all of his produce. Ve'im bo lesser chaver mimenu. So if you're going to say that the Mishnah is coming to tell us that the instruction is with regards to an Am Haaretz, but we're giving this instructions to the Chaver saying don't buy from this guy after Yom Tov. We're not telling the Am Haaretz not to continue selling because we know he's not going to listen to us. But you're going to say that we're talking about a guy who's preparing it and he's an Am Haaretz. And the instruction is that after Yom Tov, no Chaver should buy from him. So then he says, the language of the Mishnah should have said an expression that denotes buying, not yigmar. Yigmar means continue selling. If you're telling me that the instructions are here, not for the Am Haaretz, but for the Chaver, right? Telling him he's not allowed to buy, it would have had a different language. And furthermore, another reason why Rashi comes along and says that it couldn't make sense to say that we're talking about a Am Haaretz over here is because the Omer b'Maseches Beitza, we already taught in Maseches Beitza, shezuhi echad begimel dvarim shehutru seifon b'shum tchilasan. That this is one of the three cases that we mentioned in Maseches Beitza, where the Chachamim allowed you to finish off this particular thing because of the beginning. V'i ba'am haaretz. If we're talking about an Am Haaretz, afilu leisharis le'ligmar nicha. With an Am Haaretz, even if you don't allow him to complete nicha, it will still be good. The masbir beregel, because there's this argument that if I'll have nothing to sell during Yom Tov, right, I have to make an accommodation for the Am Haaretz or for the Chaver to be able to sell their stuff during Yom Tov. Otherwise nobody's going to take the effort to go and create all of this food if no one's going to be able to buy it ultimately at the end. Anyway, weiter. We're up to the next Mishnah. What happens once Yom Tov passes? So we've already said with regards to what happens with the food, we say that the food, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can continue selling it. According to the Chacham, you cannot continue selling it. Okay. Now, Meshava Regel, once the festival passed, because remember, we're dealing with the same issue. The main issue that we're trying to understand is what is the status of the Am Haaretz during Yom Tov and after Yom Tov, and what is the status of all the things touched by the Am Haaretz that came to Yerushalayim. Now remember, by the way, Am Haaretz can be a kohen as well, right? You can have a kohen Am Haaretz as well. So remember, you're going to have people coming to the Beis Hamikdash and wanting to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, even though they're Amoratzim, right? So now we have to think about what's going to happen to everything in the Azara that may have been touched by these Kohanim that are Amoratzim or by anybody else. So he says like this: Mish'ova Regel, once the Yom Tov is passed, so we say Mavir in Altaras Azara, they have to remove all the vessels to be able to now go and purify the Chatzir, the Azara, the courtyard, because the Amoratzim during Yom Tov were able to come into the courtyard and they may have touched the vessels, and so therefore they have to go and now after Yom Tov be purified. However, we say that over Haregel Yom Shishi, if Yom Tov finished on Thursday, and so now it goes straight into Friday, so they wouldn't remove all the vessels because they want to honor Shabbos and they need to leave the Kohanim to prepare at home for Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af lo b'yom chamishi. So would be the case with regards to Thursday, which means if Yom Tov finished on Wednesday, they wouldn't remove the vessels on Thursday. Why? Because the Kohanim are not free on that day either. Why not? Friday, I understand they're not free because of preparing the houses for Shabbos. But what's wrong with Thursday? Why would they not do it if it fell out on a Wednesday? Yom Tov finishes on Wednesday, and Thursday they were busy with what? So he says, Tana, this says the Gemara, Tana, it's called the Brisa. Excuse me, She'ein HaKohenim Penuyin Melahitzi Badeshen, because the Kohenim were not free to go and be and purify the whole courtyard because they were busy taking out the ashes that had been accumulated over Yom Tov. Even though there was the taking off some of the ashes, but they didn't take it all out. In other words, there was the lifting up of the ashes that took place every day, right? Right. However, actually taking it out didn't necessarily take place every day. And after Yom Tov, since you had so many people had come and so much ashes from all the karbanos, they would be busy all Thursday taking out these ashes. And therefore there wasn't an opportunity to purify the vessels. And obviously Friday, they needed that to get ready for Shabbos. Okay, that's the end of this Mishnah and this Gemara. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the final Mishnah of the Masechta. Final Mishnah of the Masechta. So let's do it. Says the Heilige Mishnah, Ketan Mavirin Altaras Hazara. So how would they do it? How would they remove the vessels for the purification of the courtyard? In other words, which vessels are affected and which ones could they leave? So he says like this: they would take all the vessels, meaning all the movable objects, all the different things that they would hold things in, and so on. All of these things that they would use, they would take it and they would go and they would immerse it. Now, during Yom Tov, they would tell the Amaratzim that were coming into the Beis Hamikdash, listen here, you're in here, and everything's fine, and everything's good. However, there are certain things we need you to just make sure that you're extremely careful. And that is, Hizaru, be careful. We turn over to Daf Chavav with base. Don't touch the showbread table. Don't touch the shulchan. Don't touch the shulchan. Now, there's a reason for it. Okay, we'll see. Kol hakelim shahoyu b'mikdash, all of the vessels that they had in the Beis Hamikdash, yesh lem shniim or shlishim, they would have replacements and a third replacement just in case, so that if the first ones became tamei, then the replacement ones would be ready for them to be able to use straight away in their place, and likewise the third, they would have a third set as well. Now, all the vessels that were in the Beis Hamikdash, to unin tefillah, they require a immersion into the mikvah. Chutz, besides mizbeach hazav, from the golden mizbeach, that was the mizbeach haktoires, and then mizbeach hanachoshes, and the copper mizbeach, that was the big altar outside. They shehein karka, because they are considered like earth. They're given the din of earth. They're so big and they're staying in one place. They're given a din of karka. Divrei Rebbe Loza. This is the words of Rebbe Loza. And the Chachamim say the reason why you don't have to be tovel them is mipnei shehein mitzupin, because they are plated, and since they are plated, that's why they don't need to be immersed in a mikvah. We're going to see what all of these things mean in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to come and elaborate on all of these things. So now, the Mishnah said that the Kohanim who are Amoritz were warned not to touch the table, right? So now we're going to learn a brisa that's going to tell us that this was also this was issued regarding another vessel as well, which we'll see is the menorah. So he says like this: Tana, I was taught in the brisa, Hizaru shematigu b'shulchan uva b'menorah. They would tell this Amoritz, Chevra, you're welcome in, but don't touch the shulchan and don't touch the menorah. Don't touch them. Okay. Pray the Gemara. V'tana didan, the author of our Mishnah, my time in the Loitani Menorah, why doesn't he mention the Menorah? Why do you mention it in the Brisa, but you don't mention it here in the Mishnah? Seemingly, the Mishnah would be a very good place to mention it, especially if it was important because of Tahara. Now, just to explain what's coming, there are certain laws that govern what you can and what you cannot do with certain kalim. Certain things in the Beis Hamikdash were not to be moved. They were not to be moved. They were supposed to stay stationary and never be moved. The Shulchan was one of those vessels that was not to be moved. Okay, and it's learned out from a pasuk. It should never be moved. It should always stand there in front of Hashem. Whereas everything else technically could be moved. So the question is going to be whether the menorah is considered to be like the Shulchan or not. So let's do it inside. So the Gemara explains, why did the Tana of our Mishnah not mention the menorah, whereas the Tana of the other Brisa did mention the menorah? She explains like this: because Shulchan ksiv bo tamid, with regards to the Shulchan, it says tamid that it should be constantly in its place, continuously, whereas menorah like ksiv bo tamid, with regards to the menorah, it doesn't say that it has to be in its place continually, and since there's no instruction to keep it there continuously, therefore it may be removed and it may be immersed according to the Tana, and therefore we don't warn the Amoritz about not touching the menorah, because we will have an opportunity to take it and immerse it into the mikvah together with all the other kalim. Right, the Gemara, what about the other brisa? So why did he say that you have to warn the Amoritz about the menorah? Why doesn't he agree with our Tana over here, who says that the menorah could be immersed? So he says, and for the Gemara, he says, the other guy, I'll tell you what he's going to say. It says with regards to the menorah that it should be opposite the shulchan. Now, since that it says it should be opposite the shulchan, so therefore we're now going to say that we're going to learn out from this that just like the menorah needs to be there tamid, so too the menorah has to be there tamid, right? In other words, if I'm telling you, you shall place the menorah opposite the shulchan, and since the shulchan always has to be there, so therefore assume that the menorah also has to always be there. And for this says the Gemara of Idach, what's the other guy going to say back to this argument? He says the Tana of our Mishnah, he doesn't hold this way, because when it says that that the menorah is opposite the table, it's just giving me the geographical location. It's not telling me that you have to learn out all the laws of shulchan for the menorah. As it says, that verse is just telling you where in the azara this should be placed, right? In other words, where in the kodesh. Where in the kodesh should this be placed? Where should it be? It should be opposite them. It should be opposite the shulchan. But we don't infer from this any other laws with regards to the menorah, and therefore the menorah can be immersed. Okay. So now, 1 second. Okay. So now we have another question. We said that what you give this warning to the Amoritz, don't touch the shulchan. But it seems, if that's the case, you're assuming that if the Amoritz touches the shulchan, it becomes tamei. But I have a reason to say that the shulchan should never become tamei, even if the Amoritz touches it. Why? We'll see. Frank the Gemara of a why don't we learn out the kli eitz also lenachasu, that this shulchan, since it's a wooden utensil that was made to be stationary, and v'chol kli eitz also lenachas lemitame, we have a rule.
Unknown caller.
We have a rule that any kli eitz, any wooden utensil that is not made to move, right? In other words, it's supposed to be stationary. Then it's not going to be metame. Why not? Says the Gemara, my time. And what's the reason for this? So there's a reason. There's a reason why we say a particular vessel, a wooden vessel that is not going to be moved, is not going to be Mekabel Tumah, because Dumya, the sack, we learn this out by comparing it to a sackcloth, right? Why? Because it has to be similar to the sackcloth in order to contract Tumah. Dumya, the sack, we need for it to be similar to a sack to be Mekabel Tumah. Why? Because there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, with regards to a dead sheretz falling onto something, that it becomes tamei. So in that pasuk it says, "Mikol kli eitz oy beged oy oy sak." This is in Vayikra chapter 11, verse 32. It says over there that from any vessel which is wooden, or a piece of clothing, or leather, or a sack. So now, since it mentions a sack, so we learn out to all the others that they have to be similar to the sack. Now, what's the story with the sack? Ma sack mitaltel mole verekom, just like a sack. You're going to carry it, whether it is filled or whether it's empty. You still take that sack. It's made to carry around. So I'm going to carry it around, whether it's full or whether it's empty, right? So too, afkol metaltel mole verekom. So too, any other vessel, it has to be carried both when it's empty and both when it's full. If you have something that either A is not carried when it's empty, which means it was never made to carry around, to move around, but it was always made to remain stationary, it's not going to be like the sack. Likewise, also, anything that when it's full, it's going to be much too heavy for you to carry. So in that case, right, it's not going to be like a sack, because a sack was always created to move when it's empty and when it's full. In both cases, the sack was designed to be able to carry what's inside of it, right? However, if you're going to have things that were designed specifically either not to be moved, to remain stationary, or something that's going to be way too heavy when it's full, so those things should not be are not Mekabel Tumah. If that's the case, the shulchan, which was designed to stay in one place, why was it designed that way? Because that's the commandment of the Torah. It should be there continuously. So therefore, it should not be Mekabel Tumah. So we have the question then, so then why did they tell the Am Haaretz, don't touch it? He shouldn't become tumah altogether. It shouldn't become impure. And for the Gemara, we cannot apply this exemption to the shulchan, because at the end of the day, the shulchan is going to be picked up and it's going to be moved when it is full and when it is empty. That's the way it was designed. Why? Because the Rish Lakish, as we see in accordance with the Rish Lakish, the Amar Rish Lakish says, "My dichsiv ala shulchan tahor." Rish Lakish had the same question, but he approached it from a different angle. It says in the pasuk, right, that you shall place the lechem upon him on what? Al hashulchan atar, on the uncontaminated table, on the pure table. But by the fact that you say that it is tahar miklal shuhu tamei, so from this we can imply that it is vulnerable to becoming tamei, and we're saying therefore it has to be either made tamei tahar or it is already tahar. But the fact is it can contract tumah. Va'amai. Why? Rish Lakish has the same question that we had. Rish Lakish came along and says that seemingly it's a kli eitz that is created to be stationary and it shouldn't be Mekabel Tumah. So what did Rish Lakish say? It comes to teach us that this shulchan, we actually lifted up. When did they lift it up? When the Yidden would come, the Kohen would lift it up, and he would show it to all the people who had come for the Yom Tov. They would show them what? The lechem upon him. They would show them this showbread, and they would say to them, See how much Hashem loves you. See, the bread is still as hot, as piping hot, as it was when it was first put down on the shulchan at the beginning of the week. At the end of the week, it's still as hot. So what do we see? What we see from this is that the shulchan was moved. It was moved to show everybody the lechem upon him. The Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, as Rabbi Shimon ben Levi said, there was a great miracle that was performed with this showbread, that at the time of its arrangement, in other words, when it was first baked and put down, it was just as hot and just as fresh. When they took it off, Shenema, like it says, with regards to this bread, to place bread that is hot on the day that is taken off. Which this is a pasuk in Shmuel, which from this pasuk we learn that when it was taken off, it was just as hot as it was when it was put when it was put down. But what comes out of the whole thing is that the shulchan was moved, and since the shulchan was moved, it's not going to be considered a kli eitz that is created to remain stationary, and so therefore, that's why we have to still warn the Am Aretz and tell him, don't touch the shulchan. Right, the Gemara, why did you have to give me this whole long answer? It's a nice answer, but I don't even need it. Why? Because at the end of the day, right, you're calling it a kli eitz, but really the shulchan aponim was coated with gold, and since it was coated with gold, that should change the whole halacha of it, and you wouldn't anymore look at it as wood, and since it's gold, it can contract tumah, and that would be the simple way of answering why we told the Am Haaretz not to touch it. That's the Gemara's question. So why do we have to go through this whole lengthy explanation if we could just give a simple explanation and say that it's been plated with gold? Frank the Gemara. So that's the question of the Gemara. Frank the Gemara. Why can't we come along and say that the reason why it's susceptible to become tumah is because of the plating? The Hatanan did we learn in a Mishnah? The Mishnah says in Kalim. What we're about to bring is a Mishnah that shows us that when something is plated, the plating supersedes, overrides the status of the vessel which it is covering. So if it's something of wood, that will change to marble or whatever it might be, whatever you're covering it with. Let's look at the Mishnah inside. So, we're quoting from Mishnah in Kalim, which says, "Hashulchan v'aldupaki sheniftachu shechipon b'shayish." If you have a wooden table or a wooden chair that becomes something that is covered by something else, right? So I think the dapukai was a kind of chair that was foldable that would be covered with leather, right? But whatever it was, or that one covers with marble, right? If they remain afterwards with room for placing goblets, tamei, they can still become tamei. In other words, it's talking about a case where the plating, where you're reducing the original material, right? It's not complete. So if you leave room to be able to put goblets on this table or on this chair, or whatever it might be, so then this thing can still become tummy. Rabbi Yehuda says that mokim hanachoson, that they must remain with room for placing the pieces of meat and bread, not just the cups, in order for it to still become tummy. But if that's not left over, then what happens is these particular utensils, or the table or the chair, whatever it might be, once they become plated, their whole status changes, and they're going to follow the marble or whatever it might be that you're covering it with. And so therefore, the same should apply when we talk about the shulchan of the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash, that although it was made out of wood, nevertheless, it was plated with gold. And since it was plated with gold, therefore, we should come along and say that what? it can become Tomei. And since it become Tomei, that's why we tell the Amoretz. Why do I have to come along and come give you the whole explanation that it's not a stationary vessel because you take it out to show the lechem upon it? Now, if you want to come along and try and answer this question by saying, Shiny shitim, because when you talk about shitim, that there was shitim wood from which they made the shulchan, it's different because it's very valuable, and something that's very valuable doesn't become bottle. That answer is only going to work in accordance with Reish Lakish. That would work well in accordance with who? Reish Lakish. What does Reish Lakish say? The Leishanu Ella Bikli Aksilgim. The rabbis did not teach that the wood is subordinate to its plating, except with regards to utensils of axilings, wood that came from overseas, which are not very valuable, but when it comes mismim, but in cases of utensils that were made from mismim wood, which are of greater value, they do not become subordinate to their plating. So shapir, then that would be a good answer, and that would explain. However, Ella, Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Omar, that his view is that he says, afilu b'chlei mismim namli batle, that when you have a coating over a plating over the wood, even if it's expensive wood, it does become bottle. It becomes subordinate to the plating. What would you say then? According to Rabbi Yochanan, the table should acquire tumah because of its plating. So we're back to the question of why did we have to come along and say this whole thing about it being stationary wood, and then coming along and explaining that it's not stationary, but you have to take it out. Why can't we just say that it's plating? Another possible thing. If you're going to want to try and answer, that in the case of the lechem aponim, right, it's not permanent coating. What do I mean it's not permanent coating? When you coat something, you could just put this coating over it, right, but not knock it in with a hammer and nails, like not, make it permanent. And so therefore, when we said in the time in the kalim, we're talking about kalim that the thing is anchored, right? It's hammered in, it's permanent. Whereas with regards to the shulchan, it's plating, which is not anchored, it's not knocked in with nails, and that's why we're not going to use this to change the status of the wood. This was something that was already asked from Reish Lakish, from Rabbi Yochanan, where Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan with regards to the law about plating, right, gold plating or any kind of plating over the wood. He asked him, is it only applying to a case of plating that is anchored or also plating that is not anchored? Furthermore, he asked another question of Rabbi Yochanan. He inquired from Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish asked from Rabbi Yochanan, "B'chaype es leviz b'zav, oy she'ein chaype es leviz b'zav." Does it apply only when the plating covers the table's rim, or even when it does not cover the rim? In other words, if it goes all the way over, or it doesn't go all the way over. So what do we see from here? That no matter what the matter of its plating, a wooden utensil plated with metal is regarded as a utensil of metal. Accordingly, if the shulchan was covered with this gold, it should be susceptible to tumah. So why do we have to come along and say it's only because you lifted it and took it out? And for the Gemara says, shiny shulchan. The shulchan has a different status, and there's a reason why there's a different status. It's because of the way the pasuk looks at it. The Rachmana Karya Eitz, because it's the Torah itself calls it Eitz. It calls the Shulchan Eitz, even though it's been plated by gold, and we were told to plate it by gold by the Torah. Nevertheless, the Torah goes back and refers to it as 8. The Siv, as it is written, this is in Yecheskel, it says, Hamizbeach 8, Sholish Amos Gavoya, V'arkei Shtayim Amos, Umiksa'isav Loi, V'arkei, V'kiroisav 8, that it says that the altar was of wood, 3 amos high, and its length was 2 amos, and its corners and its lengths and walls of wood. And he, meaning the angel, said to me, this is the table that is before Hashem. Since the Torah itself describes this, despite it being covered with gold, it still describes it as wood. Therefore, it retains the status of wood, even though it has this plating, and that's why we have to come along and say that the reason why it becomes tamei is because it's still moved. It's not a stationary utensil, right? It's not something that was created to stay in its place, because they would take it out and they would throw everybody the lechem upon it. Okay. The pasuk started. We mentioned the pasuk from Yecheskel. It started with a reference to the mizbeach, and it finished with a reference to the shulchan. Why does it call the shulchan mizbeach? Reish Lakish, both Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish explains the Amrit Havaya. Both of them say this. This man shebeis hamikdash kayam. During the period of time when the Beis Hamikdash stood, the Mizbeach is mechaper ala Adam. The Mizbeach would atone for a person. But Achshav, now that unfortunately we don't have a Mizbeach, Shulchanei shel Adam mechaper ala. A person's table atones for him. In other words, when a person does the mitzvah of achnasas orchim and he invites other people to come and eat with him, then this shulchan that you have is not just a shulchan for yourself, but you're actually being mekabel l'pnei shechina, like we say by Avraham Avinu, right? We said godol kabbalas orchim mekabalas pnei shechina, because we saw by Avraham Avinu that although he was talking to Hashem, he left Hashem to go and to be machnas eira. So too, when we invite people in our house, we're being mekabel l'pnei shechina, and that's how our table transforms into a mizbeach, and that offers a kapara for us. Now, the truth of the matter is, I did not want to finish. I did not want to finish the Masechta today. I wanted to leave it till tomorrow. All right, what to do?
Tomorrow we'll make a chazara.
No, well, you can stop.
I think let's stop here for today, and Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we will make a seal on Chagiga. I'm gonna speak to Rabbi Smith just before I actually do it, just to make sure that he's okay, because for me it's not really a seal, because for me I came in halfway. So what I'd have to do is I have to go and learn the first dafim that I didn't teach to be able to make it a real siyum for me. But I would like to do what I was thinking of doing is finishing as much as we can, and then starting Megillah tomorrow. As Hashem, I hope that would give everybody enough time today to go out and get a Megillah. And if not, then what I could do is I can give you a link to be able to follow along in Sefaria, which they have the whole Gemara online. Until you're able to get your Gemara. This Sefaria has, I think, the Steinsaltz Gemara. I think so. And it's got Hebrew and English, and you can follow along until you're able to get your own copy of the Gemara. So I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you so much. It's been
great job. Thank you, Rabbi. Take care.
Thank
Relax.
you, Rabbi.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Rabbi.